All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I know it's been already a long day. You started at 9:30. I've been promised 30 minutes to talk about all things critical when you consider running your workloads on Azure. I know that this is a developer audience, and whenever I speak to a bunch of developers, it's always a challenge. Reason being, I come from an infrastructure background. Last I coded was second year of my, third year of my engineering, and that was last decade or more than that. So coming to developer conference, why we are having this discussion? Reason being, if you are a developer and you are running your application inside a virtual machine, there are few absolutely must know concepts, or I would say things to be aware of, so that you don't get into challenges later. That's the whole idea. All right, I'm not going to delve deep into nitty-gritties that might not make sense to you guys, but trust me, this is something that is essential for every individual who's taking their first step towards the cloud. So a quick introduction: I'm Pracheta Budhwar. I'm an evangelist with Microsoft India. She brilliantly gave a great introduction, so that's pretty much me. I know it's a 30-minute slot. I absolutely will have five minutes of Q&A, but still, if your questions are unanswered and we cannot take it offline, feel free to be connected over the Twitter. So very briefly, what are we going to discuss in this 30 minutes or so? We're going to touch base about few aspects, and five as per me. Of course, as when it comes to industry, there are a lot of things that needs to be considered, but given the kind of time we have, and what are the five most important things that I believe, based on my experience, is what I'm going to share with you. It's equally important to understand how and what you have to do when it comes to running your VMs on Azure. There's a lot of things, there's a lot of misconceptions that, as your services run on Azure and a lot of things have been taken care by the vendor, it's not the case when you run your VM. You wanted more control, you have more control, but you have to define a lot of other things for yourself, yeah? And of course, there are a few demos planned up and a lot of Q&As. Since this is not it's a big hall, less crowd, expected that. But if you guys want to keep it interactive, feel free to ask questions. If you have too many, please hold on towards the end. All right, so let's get started. What are these five aspects? What I believe makes a lot of sense when you get started. Think about storage. Think about networking. How are you going to connect, access your environment on Azure? Availability, of course, operations, and what about compliance? I'm sure some of you might start thinking, what about security? It's just not there. That could be a whole discussion altogether. Absolutely, keep that in mind as well. I'll share you a few resources that you can read through how we do security, how we take care of security as a platform for Azure. All right. So now, there can be a couple of debates, when I go to cloud, there are a lot of things that should be auto scale. I'm moving towards it because it makes a lot of sense. Redundancy, etc. has to be built in. The answer is yes. Azure has the capability to do everything for you in terms of scale, elasticity, etc. But if you are going to run your VMs on Azure, which means that you are going the infrastructure as a service way, then you better decide what makes sense for you. All right. Now, here is going to be a small snippet about all these five things that you must consider before you start building your critical workloads. If you're doing test and dev, fair enough, you might just spin up one VM, install something, it's all right. If it works for whatever duration, it's okay. But if you're going to run your important applications, make sure that you consider these things. All right, digging deep into what storage brings to the table. Some of the best practices, always plan about it. Create a storage account before you go ahead and create a VM. I know it's very temptuous to go ahead and spin up a VM and say that I want a Ubuntu flavor this, or I want a VM with Windows on, or a SQL or Oracle. That's absolutely not a good practice, right? And I've seen individuals and organizations suffering very, very badly because they did not plan it well. All right, 1 year later, 6 months later, depending on where you are at your maturity level, you'll hit the glass ceiling, and then it will be a difficult conversation to have with your stakeholders. So know about it. Plan, always create a storage account beforehand. Now what is a storage account? Just your own storage in the cloud, which you can access through the SaaS keys. So don't think that it is going to be opened up by anybody else. It is your own chunk of storage that you have taken on Azure data center, as simple as that. Now you can absolutely decide that what kind of redundancy has to be there on storage. So there are 4 kind of redundancies that you can build with storage. One is local redundancy. So by default, everything that you put on Azure, every piece of every footprint that you will have on storage will have automatically 3 copies of it stored. That's called local redundant environment, LRS as we call it. Then comes zone redundancy, which means 3 copies will be maintained, but maybe in the same data center, maybe in the same region, but 3 copies will be maintained. So little bit of, not a complete DR, but little bit of DR come into play, that my environment will be running in this data center, maybe another copy will be in the next one. So in case of catastrophic failure, I'm still covered, but it is not a complete DR solution. If you are thinking about DR stands for disaster recovery or business continuity, then you must think about geo-redundant or read-only geo-redundant. Now what is geo-redundant? I will absolutely, let's say, I am running my primarily workloads on X data center. I want 3 copies running here, which is local of course, given. I want 3 more copies to run on a sister data center or a couple data center here, which means another, maybe some 500 miles apart, to ensure that if there is any real disaster that hits my primary data center, my deployments and data is not gone for a toss, and I can retrieve it from the geo-redundant environment. All right. The thing is, it is absolutely for DR. So when the primary data center goes down, then only geo comes into play. There is another way. If some of the organizations want to also access this storage while they are running their primary, then you can choose to go for a read-only geo-redundant. There will be cost variations, going from up, from the first one to the last option here. Local will be the default 3 copies, of course the cheapest, and then so on and so forth. There will be incremental costs associated because you are getting redundancy. Have more than one storage account. Many a times, even people who create storage accounts, they just create one storage account and everything gets dumped there. Not a good idea. If you're just testing out, again, that's okay. But if you are into production and critical workloads, plan depending on how you want to club your workloads together. If it is going to be one big deployment which has got, let's say, big databases, and there's going to be application which is going to have a lot of throughput, think about it. All right, have multiple storage account. Why is that so? I'll talk about the limits. There are always limits. The capacity is unlimited, but from a programmatic management perspective, there will always be limits on the containers that you create, isn't it? So know those limits. What are those limits, by the way? All right, yeah, there they are. The limits are, you will have a 500 TB limit on one storage account. Now that's a big number, honestly, but nevertheless, you must know the number, right? To 20,000 IOPS is what you can get the best out of a storage account. A real life example, one of a very big e-commerce provider in India, they were the early adopters of Azure. They're doing absolutely fantastic till the time they started hitting the roof because of storage. They did all the analysis on SQL and this and that, and there came a point we were into a discussion, and I simply just casually asked, I hope you have more than one storage account. And they're like, what do you mean? What is a storage account? Right? So it's not that, it's not rocket science, it's just plain ignorance and not knowing the limits, right? They created a couple of more and they're absolutely running fine. Have less than 640 disks per storage accounts for optimized environment, right? And you can have up to, I think one can go up to 100 storage account in one subscription. So there's a very, very big capacity that you have under your hood. Just chunk it out and plan it well, all right, so that you get a great performance. All right, no questions on storage so far? I believe so, yeah? All right, moving ahead, networking. I'll have a couple of things that I want to show you on the portal, but This is more, this is not going to be building any solution as of now. This is more about best practice sharing. So we'll make sure that we go through every concept and then we'll see what time we are left with. Networking, absolutely essential. Don't ask that if I am a developer, what I have to do with networking. You must know few basics if you really want to run your workloads well, especially your critical ones. So what about networking? When it comes to Azure, how exactly you access your environment on Azure? Is it going to be through public internet, or is it going to be through the local IP address that the VM gets? Again, I'm talking about virtual machines at the point. We're not talking about services as of now. What are the various ways and means in which you can connect? So let me get a big picture here for you to understand it. There are various multiple ways in which you can connect to Azure. One is definitely the front end or internet way of connecting, which means I can go through public IP, I can absolutely connect through various different protocols like TCP, UDP, etc. There will be load balanced endpoints for you to go and hit your deployment. You can take care of those things. We have DDoS prevention mechanism, IRS, DRS. You think about it and the platform already has that, right? Now, that is one way of connecting. Typically your customers and consumers will connect through that way. Or if you have got any services to programmatically go back and connect, will connect, isn't it? So that is one way of connecting from outside. If you are providing a service to a set of people or the world at large, this is the way they will come back and consume your service, right? There would be another way to connect when you want to connect to Azure, and that could be the backend, right? You might have your workloads running on premises. You might have a data center of your own, where there are some virtual machines, where you have your lines of code already running. You want some kind of connectivity between these two, and that's where the backend connectivity comes into play. Can I make Azure as another site of my organization? It's on the cloud, it's on Microsoft data center, doesn't matter, I'm getting capacity, I'm running these VM, and that's about it. Can I make these two talk to each other in a seamless fashion? The answer is yes. Again, there would be two scenarios where you want to connect to backend environment to your Azure. One is point to site, which means I'm a developer, I'm building a code, I want to be connected in a secure way to my Azure subscription and make sure that I can make changes, I can do my bit. I will go ahead and connect using point to site capability. It's a certificate based phenomena, very secure. Your machine can connect to Azure subscription. That's about it. Makes sense when you're a developer or a power user or a set of people in your organization only want to do that, right? So the whole environment does not need to be part of talking to each other. Whereas the second situation could be, I have my one leg of deployment running on premises and the other leg on the cloud. A lot of organizations who get started with it with the cloud many a times keep their front end on the cloud and maybe back end on premises. Try to make sure that geography is considered, because it can be absolutely disastrous scenario, but it works out fine. So let's say you have a Southeast Asia data center which is close by for us. Very soon we'll have an India data center too in few months time. But nevertheless, if you want to keep one leg of your deployment on-prem and one leg on the cloud, you need to make sure that these two can ping each other, talk to each other, and you can have some kind of control on how the traffic is going. That's where site-to-site VPN comes into play, where this whole site is trusted, and there's a trust connection over IPsec VPN, which is created, called as a dedicated tunnel between these two endpoints. Make sense? So the two ways to connect from a backend point of view, multiple ways to connect from a front-end perspective. Mostly it will be internet-based IP addressing, and I'll talk about it. And then the heart of it all, virtual networks on Azure. Absolutely essential. I would say don't even think that it has to be a mission critical workload, then only I consider a virtual network. A virtual network is a must. Reason being, you'll get a consistent IP address range where you'll know predictability about what range I'm going to get IP addresses from. You want to have a static one set up for a deployment, you can go ahead and do that. Later you want to define that who can access what and how the traffic flows between one subnet to another. You can do a lot of things. Very sophisticated topologies can be built, but you have to have a virtual network created first. So let's understand, if you do not have a virtual network, what happens? If you just go and create a VM, Azure will typically give you an IP address, right? It will be some random IP address. Tomorrow you go ahead and create another VM, try to make these two talk to each other. You have to make them talk through the public endpoint, which is not a great idea. I would absolutely not encourage your front end and back end to talk to each other over public endpoint, isn't it? So there has to be a virtual network created in the cloud, which will be for internal communication, right? So that is the core of all virtual networks. Now let's talk a little bit about IP address, because that is one thing which I've seen a lot of people getting confused about. So let's see, how it works in the Azure space. Again, from a virtual machine point of view, just stay with me for 2 minutes because there's going to be little bit of 2-3 types of IP address that I'm going to introduce. Feel free to ask questions if you have any at this juncture. So the first way to get connected to a virtual machine on Azure is a VIP. VIP stands for virtual IP. Again, names are a bit confusing, so just understand what it means. So virtual IP is an internet facing endpoint, which is a load balanced endpoint given out on each cloud service. In Azure, a virtual machine sit inside a cloud service. Cloud service is like a container for VMs, right? One cloud service can have multiple VMs, but all of them will have one VIP, one endpoint, and that is load balanced IP address given out to you automatically from Azure. Now, this is where you can go ahead and ask for reserving it. If you are building, let's say, a big deployment, a multi-tier application running inside a cloud service, all of them are in VMs talking to each other. It has a one endpoint. You want that to be reserved because you don't want to make changes to your DNS server if there are going to be any changes in times to come. So you go ahead and reserve that IP address possible. Second way to connect to a virtual machine would be internal IP address, and that's what we call as dynamic IP. Think about it like an internal IP address. The way you virtual, so every one of you have a laptop, you have an IP address that through which you connect to your corporate environment, etc. Think about it, how these VMs are going to talk to each other internally. It's a dynamically assigned IP address using Azure DHCP. If there is a requirement, you can go ahead and make the IP address static and make sure. So let's say somebody is running a domain controller, or I don't know if you want to do it for SQL, but if there is any requirement per se where you want to have a dedicated and well-defined internal IP, you can go ahead and sign up for a static one as well. All right, and the one more. So we spoke about internal, we spoke about VIP, and then there is, from an internet point of view, there's one more IP address that you can assign to a specific VM, and that is for specific workloads. I can go ahead and assign a public IP address inside a virtual machine, right? That's called as PIP. Now that will be for a specific virtual machine, not for the whole cloud service. So I might have 5 virtual machines or 15 virtual machines running in one cloud service. Only one needs to have a public IP for whatever use case. I can go ahead and give it to it, and it can then go back and connect to the internet. So think about scenarios like FTP server, or if you're going to do some kind of media hosting where it has to have a public endpoint defined on the virtual machine, you can go ahead and do that. But I just wanted to explicitly bring out the differences. VIP is for the load balanced IP address for the cloud service, whereas PIP is for the virtual machines itself, right? All right, the next topic that we must talk about, in fact, let's do one thing. Let's quickly move on to 2 things that we discussed on the demonstration piece, and then we can come back and talk about it. So one is, I spoke about storage. I hope you guys can see it properly. Yeah, I've got some storage accounts here, and this is what I was talking about. End of the day, if you do not create one, you will get something like this, an alpha portal VHD and then some alpha numeric jargon that you will never be able to remember. So it's always a good idea to create one, define the kind of redundancy, and then place your workloads accordingly. So I might go ahead and create a zone redundant or a geo redundant storage for my critical workloads, whereas I might have a local redundant for my test and dev environment, right? So I'll just go ahead and, let's say, very straightforward, I just wanted to make sure you guys go back with this. So go to storage and create a new storage account. It could be anything. Let's see if it is available. No, it is not. All right. and I just go ahead and define what kind of storage I want. I can go ahead and associate it with the affinity group, or I can define a location. So you can go ahead and say this storage is going to be, has to be in this particular data center or this region. Of course you do. By all means, common sense applies that you should have the storage and your deployment in the same region, isn't it? They have to be next to each other. So choose wisely, know where to, how to do that. That's a little bit about storage. I showed you the limits. All of them are absolutely on website, no rocket science there, but nevertheless I wanted to show you. Networks, right? So if I go ahead and try out creating a, all right, let's look at a configuration of a already defined network here, if it comes in time. I don't know when in India we'll get there where there'll be no slowness on internet. Nevertheless, so when we talk about a network, just look at it, this configuration. I have got a VNet on Azure, and then I have got a VNet on some other network on premises, and I want these to talk to each other. Here I have tried to create a site-to-site VPN environment. My local one is not responding, hence the pipe is broken. So this IPsec tunnel is broken as of now. If it would have been working, you would have seen the data in, data out here. The question really is, it is not really rocket science to configure your virtual networks on Azure. All you have to go create one to start with. To create one on Azure, just go ahead and define what is the range that you want to project. It is 10 dot range or 192 range or whatever. Select a CID. CID stands for how many IP address, usable IP address you need. IPv4 is a scarce entity these days, so choose wisely, and then you cut subnets on top of it. Later, when you want to have some kind of back-end connectivity, you can go ahead and choose point to site or site to site accordingly, right? So you could see that I can select whatever makes sense here. Again, no rocket science. You must know that these things need to be done beforehand, and I'm just showing you, I'm just scratching the surface about all these concepts. There's so much more to it. I wanted to make sure that you guys are aware of it, and then if you have further questions, I'm there to take your questions. All right, availability, big one. You have to make sure that you plan for availability. VM availability, storage availability, application availability, and when you say availability, it has various levels. One is absolutely storage we just spoke about. If you have taken care of redundancy there, you're mostly good. But what about VM availability? If I will have a redundant storage available, will my VM be available? Is that a guarantee? Yes or no? It has to be either. Come on, it's not lunch time yet. Yes or no? All right, so this crowd is like nothing applicable. Come on. All right, it is a no, because there can be DLL errors, there can be any kind of problems with the virtual machine, and my virtual machine might not respond. Or at the end of the day, everything is running on top of hardware. The hardware might upgrade. There is some planned maintenance. Even if your storage is available, your VM can go for a reboot or anything, isn't it? So how do you make sure? As I said, if it is a test and dev environment, you might not have to worry about these things. Critical workload, absolutely worry about it. So what all you should plan about? High availability, and of course backup and DR. Now high availability has to be think through in terms of VMs as well as applications. From a VM point of view, I'm telling you, applications you guys know better than me. You must think about storage, you must think about VM level, and you must think about application. So from a VM point of view, if let's say application is not aware of high availability concept, it's not cluster aware, it does not have such kind of intelligence, then at least you make sure that your virtual machine is running in a set, and if one goes down, the other can still cater to the services or request. How we deal with it inside Azure is by creating an availability set. Availability set is a concept. In the backend, what happens when you place a virtual machine in availability set, there has to be at least 2 to make a set, if not more. What are you doing in the backend? Telling the Azure Fabric that make sure that these 2 are not part of the same fault domain, and they're not part of the same update domain. What does that mean? Fault domain means that they're not part of the same rack, same hardware, not single point of failure. So if there's a power problem in one rack, both of my VMs are not affected. They should be running separately, not the single networking backbone. So you're just taking care of that. Update domain, on the other hand, means when there is a planned maintenance and there is kind of upgrade that environment needs to go through, both of them are not upgraded or rebooted at the same time. Azure really honors availability set. So if you're just doing that, you're just making sure that the two virtual machines that are running in a set, one of them is at least available if during any kind of upgrade or any such of service disruptions. All right, moving on. Backups, right? I'm sure you must have seen a lot of other services on Azure or other cloud services whereas it is offered as a PaaS environment, there's a lot of manageability that is built in. You can absolutely go ahead and configure with a click of button where you do backups, etc. Which was not the case with VMs. You still go ahead and manage your patching. You still go ahead and manage your backups. So make sure that the important workloads are being backed up. What all you can use to do that? You can use any backup solution that you're using on premises to back up those VMs. Why do you should back up your VMs? Because these are your critical workloads. It's test and dev. You can leave it, on whatever state they are. So there was a big ask that why can't I use any of the Azure services to take backups of my VMs? And we recently announced, this is now in preview, will be available for general usage soon. You can go ahead and try it out in the preview mode. You can use Azure Backup Service to take backups of your virtual machine, right? So all you have to define that, okay, whether it's a Windows machine, whether it's a Linux box, and I want to do a incremental backup or at every scheduled environment, or sorry, scheduled time, and it will keep on taking your backups, store it in the blob. That's about it, right? So this was a very big ask from customers. Correct. All right. So his question is, why do I need a backup if I already have high availability? Both, if it is your critical workload, you have to have both. I'll give you one example. Already there, but it was not extended to Azure VMs. Now it is extended to Azure VMs as well. You simply go ahead and register a VM, discover the VM, register the VM, and start protecting it. Define your protection group, policies, and schedule at which it is going to back up your virtual machines. Of course, the boring part, but you should know about it. Operations. Once you've done the architecture bit of it, you've done the first level deployment well. How about operations? How about ongoing things? What you must know? You must have a way to do monitoring, right? Your VMs have to be monitored. There are some inbuilt parameters that are there on the portal. You simply go and say that if these are the benchmarks, it goes behind across. If any of the parameters are going to fluctuate or go beyond a point, send me an alert, etc. Basic things are inbuilt. But if you want sophisticated monitoring, then you either go ahead and look into any existing monitoring tools that you are using on premises to those virtual machines on the cloud, or you can use application insight, which is a service, Azure service, possible to give you deep understanding and monitoring of your applications. For DevOps, we support Chef, Puppet, and of course PowerShell to build your provisioning environment and replicate whatever you want to do multiple times. There's something called as automation service as well. If you are into building runbooks and workflows for ongoing DevOps operations, by all means use this automation service. It is wonderful, okay? And of course, for troubleshooting, PowerShell could be one, application insight could be another, and there are various tools and options available to do troubleshooting. So know about these things while you are building your critical workloads on the cloud. And I'm just moving to the last part of discussion, and that is compliance. Now, no rocket science here. You have to know that which industry you come from. I'm sure everybody knows that. and then just simply go and check that whether the cloud is compliant to your industry requirements or not, right? Enough and plenty documentation. I just wanted to build a snippet here from information security standards to industry to specific government regulatory requirements. Azure has got it all. The very recent introduction is this ISO 27018, which is for PII information, how personal identificables are secured on Azure platform, and we are the only organization on planet Earth who has this certification. If you want to know more about it, there's a link. So there's a lot about compliance. There is a website called as Azure Trust Center, where you will get all information about compliance, privacy, how we do it on our data centers. So by all means, have those technical questions, not perception, technical questions, and go and explore. You will find enough and plenty on the website that can help you. Any questions? I'm just going to open. I have been shown that I'm out of time. I know it's lunch time, so if somebody has questions, and I'm absolutely here to stay back and answer. Yeah, it's been a very question is, if a VM is already created, later you realize it's not in VNet, you create a VNet and want to pull that VM, yes, but it will not be a pull like drag and drop and things like that. If you have a VM, you either take a backup or you will have a VHD, shut it down, create a VNet and bring it back again. It will not be, no. It's a very basic, so be it CPU, be it memory, be it, be it networking, these are very core fundamentals of core ingredient to a virtual machine. If you're changing any of these, it has to put into a turn off state and make that change. Possible, of course. So while you're getting started, start with virtual network. That is one of the things. Storage and network, it's very easy, but somehow it gets missed. Anything else? All right. Thank you so much. You have been quite audience, but thanks for staying back before lunch, and hope you learned something new. Thank you so much.